Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of my channel. My name is Keika. I'll be going over textbooks chapter by chapter, section by section. Last two videos we went over concept 1.1, the study of life reveals unifying themes. And we also went over concept 1.2, the core theme, evolution accounts for unity and diversity of life. This video will be going over concept 1.3, on studying nature, scientists test and form hypotheses. So we'll be going over exploration and observation, gathering and analyzing data, forming and testing hypotheses, questions that can and cannot be answered by science, the flexibility of the scientific process, a case study in scientific inquiry, investigating coloration in mouse populations, variables and controls in experiments, and theories in science. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, concept 1.3. In studying nature, scientists form and test hypotheses. Science is a way of knowing, an approach to understanding the natural world. It developed out of our curiosity about ourselves, other life forms, our planet, and the universe. The word science is derived from a Latin verb meaning to know. Striving to understand seems to be one of our basic urges. At the heart of science is inquiry, the search for information and explanations of natural phenomena. There is no formula for a successful scientific inquiry, no single scientific method that researchers must rigidly follow. As in all quests, science includes elements of challenge, adventure, and luck, along with careful planning, reasoning, creativity, patience, and the persistence to overcome setbacks. Such diverse elements of inquiry make science far less structured than most people realize. That said, it is possible to highlight certain characteristics that help distinguish science from other ways of describing and explaining nature. Scientists use a process of inquiry that includes making observations, forming logical, testable explanations, hypotheses, and testing them. The process is necessarily repetitive. In testing a hypothesis, more observations may inspire revision of the original hypothesis or formation of another one, thus leading to further testing. In this way, scientists circle closer and closer to their best estimation of the laws governing nature. Okay. So here I wrote, science is an approach to understanding the natural world. Science comes from the Latin verb to know, which is scio. Inquiry, the search for information and explanation of natural phenomena, and is not confined to a specific method. Scientific inquiry is not always structured, requires challenge, adventure, luck, planning, reasoning, creativity, patience, persistence, and money. Process is generally to make observations, form logical and testable explanations, hypotheses, and testing the explanations to see if they're true based off results. This is repetitive. Revisions to original hypothesis may be required. New hypothesis may be required with more observation. Okay? Exploration and observation. Biology, like other sciences, begins with careful observations. In gathering information, biologists often use tools such as microscopes, precision thermometers, or high-speed cameras that extend their senses or facilitate careful movement. Observations can reveal valuable information about the natural world. For example, a series of detailed observations have shaped our understanding of cell structure, and another set of observations is currently expanding our database of genome sequences from diverse species and databases of genes whose expression is altered in various diseases. In exploring nature, biologists also rely heavily on the scientific literature, the published contributions of fellow scientists. By reading about and understanding past studies, scientists can build on the foundation of existing knowledge, focusing their investigations on observations that are original and on hypotheses that are consistent with previous findings. Identifying publications relevant to a new line of research is now easier than at any point in the past, thanks to indexed and searchable electronic databases. So on my notes side, I wrote, gathering information often requires tools, microscopes, thermometers, cameras. The more advanced the tool, the closer to accurate measurement. Observations provide valuable information about the natural world. The more detailed and precise the information, the greater our understanding. Biologists rely heavily on our scientific literature, contributions by fellow scientists, and can build on the foundation of existing knowledge while testing whether results of experiments are consistent with previous findings. Much easier now with electronic databases. Okay. Gathering and analyzing data. Recorded observations are called data. Put another way, data are items of information on which scientific inquiry is based. The term data implies numbers to many people, but some data are qualitative, often in the form of recorded descriptions rather than numerical measurements. For example, Jane Goodall spent decades recording her observations of chimpanzee behavior during research in a Tanzanian jungle. In her studies, Goodall also enriched the field of animal behavior with volumes of quantitative data, such as the frequency and duration of specific behaviors for different members of a group of chimpanzees in a variety of situations. Quantitative data is generally expressed as numerical measurements and often organized into tables and graphs. Scientists analyze their data using a type of mathematics called statistics to test whether their results are significant or merely due to random fluctuations. All results presented in this text have been shown to be statistically significant. That's good to know. That's Jane Goodall. In field notebooks, often sketches of animals' behavior. Aww. Collecting and analyzing observations can lead to important conclusions based on the logic called inductive reasoning. Through induction, we derive generalizations from a large number of specific observations. The sun always rises in the east is one example. Another biological example is the generalization that all organisms are made of cells, which was based on 2 centuries of microscopic observations made by biologists examining cells in diverse biological specimens. Careful observations and data analyses, along with the generalizations reached by induction, are fundamental to our understanding of nature. Okay, so for data and analyzing data I wrote recorded observations. Qualitative data are recorded descriptions of pain, or pain is an example. So pain such as like, is it sharp? Is it blunt? Is it burning? Examples like that. Or quantitative data, numerical measurements, like lab values. So this could be like, on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? So that would be quantitative. You turn something into a number. And then scientists rely on statistics to differentiate between significant data and or fluctuations. Collecting and analyzing data can lead to conclusions through inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning. Generalizations based off a large number of observations, specific to general. The sun always rises in the east, or all cells or organisms are made of cells. Okay. Forming and testing hypotheses. Our innate curiosity often stimulates us to pose questions about the natural basis for phenomena we observe in the world. What caused the different chimpanzee behaviors observed in the wild? What explains the variation in coat color among the mice of a single species, shown in figure 1.1? Answering such questions usually involves forming and testing logical explanations, that is, hypotheses. In science, the hypothesis is an explanation based on observations and assumptions that lead to testable prediction. Said another way, a hypothesis is an explanation on trial. A hypothesis is usually a rational accounting for a set of observations based on the available data and guided by inductive reasoning. A scientific hypothesis must lead to predictions that can be tested by making additional observations or by performing experiments. An experiment is a scientific test carried out under controlled conditions. We all make observations and develop questions and hypotheses in solving everyday problems. Let's say, for example, that your desk lamp is plugged in and turned on, but the bulb isn't lit. That's an observation. The question is obvious. Why doesn't the lamp work? Two reasonable hypotheses based on your experience are that the bulb is burnt out or the bulb is not screwed in properly. All of these alternative hypotheses lead to predictions you can test with experiments. For example, the burnt out bulb hypothesis predicts that replacing the bulb will fix the problem. Figure 1.22 diagrams this informal inquiry. Figuring things out in this way by trial and error is hypothesis-based approach. So this is figure 1.22, a simplified view of the scientific process. So observation, the desk lamp doesn't work. Question, why doesn't the desk lamp work? The two hypotheses, bulb is burnt out or bulb is improperly screwed in. Prediction, and then test of prediction, and then result. Okay? So under my notes, I wrote, curiosity leads to questions. Answering questions usually involves forming and testing logical explanations. Hypothesis. Hypothesis is an explanation based on observations and assumptions that leads to a testable prediction. Explanation on trial. Experiment is a scientific test carried out under controlled conditions. Deductive reasoning. A type of logic called deduction is also built into the use of hypotheses in science. While induction entails reasoning from a set of specific observations to reach a general conclusion, deductive reasoning involves logic that flows in the opposite direction, from the general to the specific. From general premises, we extrapolate to the specific results we should expect if the premises are true. In the scientific process, deductions usually take the form of predictions of results that will be found if a particular hypothesis premise is correct. We then test the hypothesis by carrying out experiments or observations to see whether or not the results are as predicted. This deductive testing takes the form of if-then logic. In the case of the desk lamp example, if the burnt-out bulb hypothesis is correct, then the lamp should work if you replace the bulb with a new one. We can use the desk lamp example to illustrate two other key points about the use of hypotheses in science. First, one can always devise additional hypotheses to explain a set of observations. For instance, another hypothesis to explain our non-working desk lamp is that the wall socket is faulty. Although you could design an experiment to test this hypothesis, you can never test all possible hypotheses. Second, we can never prove that a hypothesis is true. Suppose that replacing the bulb fixed the lamp. The burnt-out lamp hypothesis would be the most likely explanation, but testing supports that hypothesis not by proving that it is correct, but rather than failing to prove it incorrect. For example, even if replacing the bulb fixed the desk lamp, It might have been because there was a temporary power outage that just happened to end while the bulb was being changed. Although a hypothesis can never be proved beyond all doubt, testing it in various ways can significantly increase our confidence in its validity. Often, rounds of hypothesis formulation and testing lead to a scientific consensus, the shared conclusion of many scientists that a particular hypothesis explains the known data well and stands up to experimental testing. So deductive reasoning, I wrote. Deductive reasoning involves logic that flows from general to specific. In science, deductions are usually predictions of results that would be found if the hypothesis is correct, if-then logic. One can always devise/create additional hypotheses to explain a set of observations. We can never prove a hypothesis true. We can only fail to prove the hypothesis is incorrect. Although a hypothesis can never be proved beyond all doubt, testing it in various ways can increase our confidence in validity and may lead to sense of shared consensus or conclusion. Questions that can and cannot be addressed by science. Scientific inquiry is a powerful way to learn about nature, but there are limitations to the kinds of questions it can answer. A scientific hypothesis must be testable. There must be some observation or experiment that can reveal if such an idea is likely to be true or false. The hypothesis that a burnt-out bulb is the sole reason that the lamp doesn't work would not be supported if replacing the bulb with a new one didn't fix the lamp. Not all hypotheses meet the criteria of science. You wouldn't be able to test a hypothesis that invisible ghosts are fooling with your desk lamp. Because science only deals with natural, testable explanations for natural phenomena, it can neither support nor contradict the invisible ghost hypothesis, nor whether spirits or elves cause storms, rainbows, or illnesses. Such supernatural explanations are simply outside the bounds of science, as are religious matters, which are issues of personal faith. Science and religion are not mutually exclusive or contradictory. They are simply concerned with different issues. So here I wrote, there are limitations in science. A scientific hypothesis must be testable. There must be observation or experiment that could reveal if something is true or false. Science only deals with the natural, testable explanation for natural phenomena. And science and religion are not mutually exclusive or contradictory. They are simply concerned with different issues. The flexibility of the scientific process. The way that researchers answer questions about the natural physical world is often idealized as the scientific method. However, very few scientific inquiries adhere rigidly to the sequence of steps that are typically used to describe this approach. For example, a scientist may start to design an experiment, but then backtrack after realizing that more preliminary observations are necessary. In other cases, observations remain too puzzling to prompt well-defined questions until further study provides new context in which to view those observations. For example, scientists could not unravel the details of how genes encode proteins until after the discovery of DNA, an event that took place in 1953. A more realistic model of the scientific process is shown in Figure 1.23. The focus of this model, shown in the central circle in the figure, is the forming and testing of hypotheses. This core set of activities is the reason that science does so well in explaining phenomena in the natural world. These activities, however, are shaped by exploration and discovery, the upper circle in Figure 1.23, and influenced by interactions with other scientists and with society more generally, the lower circles. For example, the community of scientists influences which hypotheses are tested, how the test results are interpreted, and what value is placed on the findings. Similarly, societal needs such as the push to cure cancer or understand the process of climate change may help shape what research projects are funded and how extensively the results are discussed. So here we have figure 1.23. I'm going to click on it. Okay, so here we see, hold on. Okay, so here we see forming and testing hypotheses, testing ideas, and interpreting results. And going up, we see exploration and discovery, observing nature, asking questions, reading scientific literature. Down here is community analysis and feedback. So we have feedback and peer review, replication of findings, publication, and consensus building. Societal benefits and outcomes, developing technology, informing policy, solving problems, and building knowledge. Okay. Now that we have highlighted the key features of scientific inquiry, making observations and forming and testing hypotheses, you should be able to recognize these features in a case study of actual scientific research. Okay. So, for the flexibility of scientific process, I wrote, the way researchers answer questions about the natural and physical world is often idealized as a scientific method. Very few inquiries adhere to this sequence rigidly. And the scientific process consists of forming and testing hypotheses, testing ideas and interpreting results, exploration and discovery, societal benefits and outcomes, and community analysis and feedback. Okay. A case study in scientific inquiry. Investigating coat coloration in mouse populations. Our case study begins with a set of observations and inductive generalizations. Color patterns of animals vary widely in nature, sometimes even among members of the same species. What accounts for such variation? As you may recall, the two mice depicted at the beginning of this chapter are members of the same species, Pyromyscus polionotus, but they have different coat or fur color patterns and reside in different environments. The beach mouse lives along the Florida seashore, a habitat of brilliant white sand dunes with sparse clumps of beach grass. The inland mouse lives on darker, more fertile soil, farther inland. Even at a brief glance at the photographs in figure 1.24 reveals a striking match of the mouse coloration to its habitat. The natural predators of these mice, including hawks, owls, foxes, and coyotes, are all visual hunters. They use their sense of sight to look for their prey. It was logical, therefore, for Francis Bertodi Sumner, a naturalist studying populations of these mice in the 1920s, to form the hypothesis that their coloration patterns had evolved as adaptations that camouflaged the mice in their native environments, protecting them from predation. So, here we see the beach mice matches the color of their environment, and we see the inland mouse, and it matches its environment inland. As obvious as the camouflage hypothesis may seem, it still required testing. In 2010, biologist Hoppy Hoekstra of Harvard University and a group of her students headed to Florida to test a prediction that mice with coloration did not match their habitat would be preyed on. To test a prediction that mice with coloration that did not match their habitat would be preyed on more heavily than the native well-matched mice. Summarized, figure 1.25 summarizes this field experiment, introducing a format we will use throughout this text to walk through other examples of biological inquiry. So figure 1.25. Inquiry. Does camouflage affect predation rates on population of mice? Hopi, Hoekstra, and colleagues tested the hypothesis that coat coloration provides camouflage that protects beach and inland populations of Paromyscus polionotus mice from predation in their habitats. The researchers spray-painted mouse models with light or dark color patterns that matched those of the beach and inland mice, and placed models with each of the patterns in both habitats. In the next morning, they counted damaged or missing models. Results. For each habitat, the researchers calculated the percentage of attacked models that were camouflaged or non-camouflaged. In both habitats, the models whose patterns did not match their surroundings suffered much higher predation than the camouflage models. So as you can see, these are the results that they got. This is on the beach habitat. So the camouflaged, the control, did not get attacked nearly as much as the non-camouflaged experimental group. And on the inland, we see a similar thing. The camouflaged, controlled, dark model did not get attacked as much as the white, experimental, non-camouflaged one did on the inland habitat. So the conclusion, Conclusion. The results are consistent with the researchers' prediction that mouse models with camouflage coloration would be attacked less often than non-camouflage mouse models. So thus, the experiment supports the camouflage hypothesis. The researchers built hundreds of models of mice and spray-painted them to resemble either beach or inland mice, so that the models differed only in their color patterns. The researchers placed equal numbers of these model mice randomly in both habitats and left them overnight. The mouse models resembled the native mice in the habitat. The mouse models resembling the native mice in the habitat were the control group. For instance, the light-colored mouse models in the beach habitat, while the mouse models with the non-native coloration were the experimental group. For example, the darker models in the beach habitat. The following morning, the team counted and recorded signs of predation events, which ranged from bites and gouge marks on some of the models to the outright disappearance of others. Judging by the shape of predation bites in the tracks surrounding the experimental sites, the predators appear to be split fairly evenly. The predators appear to be split fairly evenly between mammals and birds. So foxes, coyotes, owls, herons, and hawks. For each environment, the researchers then calculated the percentage of predation events that targeted camouflage models. The results were clear-cut. Camouflage models showed much lower predation rates than those lacking camouflage in both the beach habitat, where light mice were less vulnerable, and the inland habitat, where the dark mice were less vulnerable. The data thus fit the key prediction of camouflage hypothesis. Okay, so for the case study I wrote, what accounts for color pattern variations? Francis Bertoldi Sumner formed the hypothesis that coloration patterns had evolved as adaptations that camouflage the mice in their native environments, protecting them from predation. Obvious, but still required testing. The experiment. Spray-painted mouse models with light or dark color patterns that match their habitats. The next morning, they counted damaged or missing models. Results. Researchers calculated the percentage of attacked models that were camouflaged or non-camouflaged. Camouflage were the control group and were attacked less than non-camouflaged. which were the experimental group. Results were consistent with researchers' prediction, thus supporting the hypothesis. A control is a variable that remains unchanged or unaffected by other variables. The experimental group is the subjects or variables that are being tested. And I just included that for myself. It wasn't really in the reading. Okay, so variables and controls in experiments. In carrying out an experiment, a researcher often manipulates one factor in a system and observes the effects of this change. The mouse camouflage experiment described in Figure 1.25 is an example of a controlled experiment, one that is designed to compare an experimental group, the non-camouflage mice models in this case, with a control group, the camouflage models. Both the factor that is manipulated and the factor that is subsequently measured are variables, a feature or quantity that varies in an experiment. In our example, the color of the mouse model was the independent variable, the factor that was being manipulated by the researchers. The dependent variable is the factor being measured that is predicted to be affected by the independent variable. In this case, the researchers measured the amount of predation in response to the variation of color in the mouse model. Note also that the experimental and control groups differ in only one independent variable, color. As a result, the researchers could rule out other factors as causes of the more frequent attacks of the non-camouflage mice, such as different numbers of predators or different temperatures in the different test areas. The clever experimental design left coloration as the only factor that could account for the low predation rate on models' camouflage with respect to the surrounding environment. A common misconception is the term controlled experiment. A common misconception is that the term controlled experiment means that scientists control all features of the experimental environment, but that's impossible in field research and can be very difficult even in highly regulated laboratory environments. Researchers usually control unwanted variables not by eliminating them through environmental regulation, but by canceling out their effects by using control groups. Okay, so for variables and controls in experiments, I wrote, during experiments, researchers manipulate one factor in a system and observes the effects of this change. Controlled experiment, when an experimental group is being compared with a control group. Variables, a feature or quantity that is varied in an experiment. Independent variable, the factor being manipulated, color of the mouse. Dependent variable, factor being measured that is predicted to be affected by the independent variable, the amount of predation in response to color. A common misconception is that the term controlled experiment means that scientists control all features of the experimental environment. Not true, because it's impossible in field research and difficult even in highly regulated labs. Usually control unwanted variables by canceling out their effects by using control groups. Okay. Theories in science. It's just a theory. Our everyday use of the term theory often implies an untested speculation, but the term theory has a different meaning in science. What is a scientific theory, and how is it different from a hypothesis or from mere speculation? First, a scientific theory is much broader in scope than a hypothesis. This is a hypothesis. Coat coloration, well matched to their habitat, is an adaptation that protects mice from predators. But this is a theory. Evolutionary adaptations arise by natural selection. This theory proposes that natural selection is the evolutionary mechanism that accounts for the enormous variety of adaptations of which coat color in mice is but one example. but but one example. This theory proposes that natural selection is an evolutionary mechanism that accounts for an enormous variety of adaptations, of which coat color in mice is but one example. Okay. Second, a theory is general enough to spin off many new testable hypotheses. For example, the theory of natural selection motivated two researchers at Princeton University, Peter and Rosemary Grant, to test the specific hypothesis that the beaks of Galapagos finches evolve in response to the changes in the types of available food. The results supported their hypothesis. And third, compared to any one hypothesis, a theory is generally supported by a much greater body of evidence. The theory of natural selection has been supported by a vast quantity of evidence, with more being found every day, and has not been contradicted by any scientific data. Those theories that become widely adopted in science, such as the theory of natural selection and the theory of gravity, explain a great diversity of observations and are supported by a vast accumulation of evidence. Finally, scientists will sometimes modify or even reject a previously supported theory if new research consistently produces results that don't fit. For example, biologists once lumped bacteria and archaea together as a kingdom of prokaryotes. When new methods for comparing cells and molecules could be used to test such relationships, the evidence led to scientists to reject the theory that bacteria and archaea are members of the same kingdom. If there is truth in science, it is at best conditional, based on the weight of available evidence. Okay. So, that is concept 1.3. Let's just look at the overview real quick, just to see what we went over just now. We went over exploration and observation, gathering and analyzing data, forming and testing hypotheses, questions that can and cannot be addressed by science, the flexibility of the scientific process, a case study in the scientific inquiry, investigating coat coloration in mouse populations, variables and controls in experiments, and theories in science. Okay, so next video, we'll be going over concept 1.4, science benefits from a cooperative approach and diverse viewpoints. And we'll be going over building on the work of others, science, technology, and society, and the value of diverse viewpoints in science. Okay? So, thanks for watching this video. I'll see you guys next time.